The rain wasn't just falling that night. It was attacking the pavement, each drop a tiny bullet aimed straight at my already shattered heart. And Leo, the man I'd shared 3 years of my life with, stood under the awning of our favorite cafe, the very spot where he'd first told me he loved me, and looked at me as if I were a stranger. An inconvenient stranger. "You have to understand, Mia," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth I'd once built my world around. "Love doesn't pay the bills. Your dreams, they're beautiful in a childish sort of way. But I need someone practical, someone with real prospects." Prospects? The word hit me with more force than the icy rain soaking through my thin jacket. I could feel the eyes of other cafe patrons through the window, their pitying glances like physical blows. My cheeks burned with a humiliation so profound it stole my breath. 3 years. 3 years of supporting him through his master's degree, of working double shifts so he could focus on his studies, of believing in us when he had nothing. And now that he'd landed a prestigious internship, I was, what? Excess baggage. A relic from his poorer, less sophisticated past. "I have prospects," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. My dream of opening my own design studio suddenly felt foolish, a silly fantasy he'd merely tolerated. He had the decency to look away, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Not the kind that matter in the real world. You're always in the clouds, Mia. I need my feet on the ground. I'm sorry." The apology was worse than the insult. It was the period at the end of the sentence that ended us. He turned and walked away, his silhouette swallowed by the glossy, rain-smeared city, not even a backward glance. I stood there, frozen, the cold seeping deep into my bones, until a waiter from the cafe gently guided me out of the doorway, his expression a mixture of pity and impatience. I was literally in the way. I wish I could tell you I screamed or cried or ran after him. But sometimes the most profound heartbreaks are silent. They hollow you out from the inside, leaving you a fragile shell, just one tap away from crumbling into a million pieces. I walked home in that relentless rain, each step a funeral march for the future I thought we'd have. But that night, as I lay shivering in my empty bed, listening to the storm rage outside, something happened that would change my life forever. The days that followed were a blur of gray. The pain of the betrayal was bad enough, but the aftermath, that was a special kind of torture. Our mutual friends, the ones I thought were our asterisk friends, suddenly had very clear allegiances. "Leo said you became really clingy," Sarah mentioned over a strained brunch that I never should have agreed to. "He just outgrew you, Mia," another said, not unkindly, but the words were daggers all the same. "It happens." The gossip was a wildfire, and I was the one burning at the stake. I was the too much girl, too much dream, not enough ambition, too much heart, not enough sense. My family, ever practical, sighed and said, "We told you so. You should have settled down with a nice, stable accountant." The silence in my apartment became a living entity, a heavy blanket of loneliness that smothered me every night. I'd stare at my phone, willing it to ring, willing him to take it all back, knowing with a sickening certainty that he never would. So I want you to really think about this. To put yourself in my worn-out shoes, feeling the chill of that rain, the sting of those whispers. If you were in my shoes, your heart publicly broken, your character assassinated over coffee and croissants, would you have swallowed your pride and fought for him? Would you have begged? Or would you do what I did and decide to walk away with nothing but the tattered remains of your self-respect? I chose to walk, and in doing so, I literally walked right into my destiny. A month later, desperate for any job that would pay the rent and get me out of my toxic waitressing job, I found myself running late for an interview at a sleek, intimidating skyscraper downtown, Thorn Industries. My one good blazer felt cheap and out of place. My resume, printed at the library, seemed flimsy in my trembling hands. I was fumbling with it, my head down, mentally rehearsing answers to questions I was sure to fail, when I turned a corner and slammed hard into a wall of a man. The impact was solid, jarring. A sharp gasp escaped me as my papers went flying, a blizzard of my inadequacies scattering across the polished marble floor. My purse tipped, spitting out old receipts, a lone lipstick, and my dreams of making a good first impression. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," I stammered, dropping to my knees to frantically gather the mess, my face burning with a fresh wave of humiliation. But then he knelt down with me. I looked up, my apology dying on my lips. He wasn't just a man. He was arresting. Sharp, intelligent features, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes the color of a stormy sea that held mine with an unnerving intensity. He wasn't angry. He was calm. Utterly, profoundly calm. He moved with a quiet grace, his hands elegant, strong, carefully collecting my scattered papers as if they were important documents. "It's quite all right," he said, his voice a low, warm baritone that seemed to vibrate through the marble floor and straight into my bones. He handed me my resume, his fingers brushing against mine. A jolt, warm and entirely unwelcome, shot up my arm. "The floors are unusually slippery today," he added, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips as if he were sharing a private joke to put me at ease. He stood, offering a hand to help me up. His grip was firm, sure. I mumbled another apology, my heart hammering a frantic, chaotic rhythm against my ribs, and fled towards the elevators, feeling his gaze on my back the entire way. I got the job, personal assistant to the executive vice president. As I sat in HR, signing the paperwork, my mind kept drifting back to the man in the lobby. The cut of his suit, the effortless authority, the surprising kindness. But what if the man I just bumped into wasn't just a handsome, well-dressed executive? What if he was the one man who could rewrite my entire story? The mystery began the moment I started my new job. My direct boss was a kind, harried woman named Evelyn, but the man from the lobby, he was a constant, enigmatic presence. His name was Alexander, just Alexander. No one used a last name. He moved through the offices of Thorn Industries with a quiet reverence following him. People straightened up when he passed, voices lowered. He was the VP of something important. Something that required a team of severe-looking assistants and a private elevator that required a keycard. Our paths crossed in the break room. He was waiting for the espresso machine, looking impossibly out of place amidst the cheap mugs and microwave. "Ah," he said, those stormy eyes landing on me. "The human hurricane from the lobby." My face flamed. "I promise I'm usually more coordinated." "A little chaos is good for the soul," he replied, his tone serious but his eyes twinkling. "It reminds us we're alive." And that was it. Small, seemingly insignificant moments that began to weave a thread between us. He'd ask for my opinion on a presentation draft, genuinely listening to my input. I'd find a book on my desk, a classic novel I'd mentioned in passing, with a simple post-it note that read, "Thought you might appreciate this." The chemistry was a slow, steady burn, a low hum of electricity that charged the very air when we were in the same room, but secrets lingered around him like a fine mist. He was gentle, yet I sensed an impenetrable fortress around his heart. He'd share a piece of his past, growing up overseas, losing his parents young, but the details were always vague, the emotions carefully locked away. And me, I was a fortress of my own. Every time I felt a flicker of something for Alexander, Leo's voice would echo in my mind. "You're too much. Not enough." I'd pull back, building my walls higher, terrified of being so thoroughly dismantled again. So I have to ask you, because I truly struggled with this. When your heart is still a collection of broken pieces, held together with little more than tape and hope, would you ever dare to trust someone new? Would you let down your guard for a moment of kindness, or would you keep it firmly up, protecting the shattered remains of what was? The obstacles, of course, arrived right on schedule. Just as Alexander and I started having coffee together regularly, just as I began to learn the cadence of his silence and the meaning behind his small smiles, my past came knocking. Leo, hearing through the grapevine about my fancy new job, started texting. "I miss you. I made a huge mistake. Can we talk?" The messages were like poison, seeping back into my life, making me doubt my newfound stability. And at work, the rumors started. whispers in the women's bathroom, sideways glances in the elevator. She's sleeping her way up. How else did someone like Asterisk her get a job here? The venom was familiar, a chilling echo of the gossip after the breakup. It made me want to hide to make myself small. But the biggest obstacle was Alexander himself. One day, he'd be sharing a sandwich with me on the rooftop terrace, telling me about his fear of heights in a shockingly vulnerable confession. The next, he'd vanish. His office would be dark, his phone switched off, his head of security, a stern man named Mr. Chen, informing me he was unavailable for days at a time. No explanation, no warning. I'd be left with a knot of anxiety in my stomach, convinced he was married or a criminal or something far worse than I could imagine. The suspense was a physical weight on my chest. Every time I felt us teetering on the edge of something real, something would pull him into the shadows. And that's when I started to realize, with a dawning, terrifying clarity, he wasn't just any man. The private jets mentioned casually in memos, the way foreign dignitaries were suddenly on his calendar, the sheer, unnerving scale of his authority that went far beyond a vice president's pay grade. The clues were adding up, pointing towards a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The revelation didn't come in a whispered secret. It came in a thunderclap. The Thorn Industries Global Gala. I was there as part of the event staff, feeling like a complete fraud in a rented black dress, tasked with ensuring the VIPs had everything they needed. The ballroom was a sea of diamonds and power, a world I could observe but never belong to. And then I saw him. Alexander. He stood at the edge of the dance floor, but he wasn't the man I knew from coffee breaks and shared books. He was transformed. His tuxedo was a work of art, tailored to perfection. His posture was that of a king. The air around him crackled with a different kind of energy, pure, undiluted power. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the main stage. The CEO of Thorn Industries, a man I'd only ever seen in Forbes magazine, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed through the hall. "It is my great honor to introduce the man whose vision built this company, the man to whom we all owe our success, the founder and true leader of our global empire, Alexander Thorn." The screens flanking the stage, 10 feet tall, flashed to life with his face. Alexander Thorn, not just a VP. The Asterisk founder Asterisk. The Asterisk owner Asterisk. A trillion-dollar empire. My breath hitched, my world tilting on its axis. The air left my lungs. I scanned the crowd, my gaze against its own will found Leo. He was there with his new, practical girlfriend, his face a perfect mask of stunned, bitter, earth-shattering regret. His mouth was hanging open, his eyes wide with a realization that was physically painful to watch. And then Alexander's gaze from the stage found mine in the vast, crowded sea of people. He held it. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable, as if asking a silent, monumental question. And in that deafening silence, surrounded by the gasps and applause of 1,000 people, I heard Leo's voice from that rainy night as clearly as if he were standing next to me. "You're not enough." And I could almost hear Alexander's silent, powerful reply echoing through the grand hall. "You said she wasn't enough. Do you still think that now?" What followed wasn't an immediate fairy tale. The romantic resolution was quieter, messier, more real. He found me later, hiding on a deserted balcony, trembling so hard I could barely stand. "You lied to me," I whispered, the hurt a fresh, raw wound. "I omitted," he corrected softly, coming to stand beside me, not touching, just sharing the space. "After my parents died, this company, this wealth, it became a barrier. Everyone I met saw the balance sheet, the name, the power. They never saw me, the boy who was lonely, the man who is still often lonely. With you, you saw Asterisk me first, the man who liked your terrible, too sweet coffee and your stubborn, idealistic spirit. You looked at me, not through me." His confession was a crack in his own fortress. He spoke of his fear, that his wealth was a curse that scared away any chance of real, unconditional love. And I, with tears finally breaking free and streaming down my face, admitted my own terror. the deep-seated fear that I was inherently lacking, that I would always be abandoned for being too much and not enough all at once. We were two broken people, standing under the stars, holding each other's shattered pieces and wondering if they could ever fit together. But I need your honest opinion here. This is the part that kept me up at night. Can two broken hearts, with all their sharp edges and fragile cracks, really heal each other? Or is it just a beautiful, temporary lie we tell ourselves before the pieces cut too deep? Just when I thought we'd found our fragile, hard-won piece, the climax hit with the force of a sledgehammer. Leo, desperate, humiliated, and fueled by a toxic mix of jealousy and greed, showed up at the corporate headquarters. He'd somehow gotten past security and was waiting in the lobby, his face a twisted mask of rage. He had documents, fake emails, doctored texts, a whole web of lies he'd spun to prove I was a manipulative gold digger who'd targeted Alexander from the beginning. "You think she loves you," he screamed, his voice echoing through the marble hall, drawing a crowd of horrified employees. "She's using you. She's a nobody from nowhere, and she saw her ticket to an easy life. She was with me when she had nothing." Security moved towards him, but Alexander held up a single hand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, an unshakable mountain of calm composure, his power radiating not from threat but from absolute certainty. "The only person here digging for something," Alexander said, his voice lethally quiet, cutting through Leo's hysteria like a knife, "is you, and you've come up empty." He looked at Leo not with anger but with a profound, devastating pity. "You had a treasure, and you threw it away because you were too small-minded to see its worth. That is a failure of character I cannot fix." It was the most powerful thing I had ever witnessed. Leo deflated on the spot, his lies rendered useless and pathetic against Alexander's immovable truth. He was escorted out, his reign of emotional terror finally, definitively over. I stood there, my legs weak with relief, thinking the drama was finally behind us, that we could finally breathe. But just when I thought it was all over, fate, it seemed, had one last, breathtaking twist waiting for me. The true resolution wasn't found in that public confrontation or in the shocking revelation of his wealth. It was forged in the quiet that followed. In the gentle mornings where he'd bring me tea exactly how I liked it, remembering I took honey, not sugar. It was in the way we learned to trust. Slowly and patiently, building something real and sturdy from the rubble of our pasts. Our love didn't win because he was a trillionaire. It won because we chose, every single day, to be vulnerable, to be honest, to heal. We got married on a secluded cliffside, surrounded by the roaring ocean and a handful of true friends. There was no press, no fanfare. Just us, and the profound peace of two souls who had finally found their home in each other. Sometimes the people who break us, who make us question our every worth, are only there to prepare us for the ones who will truly see us, who will pick up our pieces not with pity, but with reverence, and help us build something even more beautiful. Sometimes the people who break us, who make us question our every worth, are only there to prepare us for the ones who will truly see us, who will pick up our pieces not with pity, but with reverence, and help us build something even more beautiful. That truth didn't come to me in a single, blinding flash. It settled in slowly, like the gentle dawn after a long and stormy night. It was in the quiet consistency of our life after the whirlwind. The dramatic confrontations and shocking revelations were over, and what remained was the simple, profound work of building a life together. Alexander never again hid who he was. The power, the wealth, the staggering influence. It was all simply a fact, like the color of the sky. But he showed me that those things were not him. The man I fell in love with was the one who, after a grueling 14-hour day negotiating a multi-billion-dollar merger, would come home and meticulously help me tile the backsplash in the kitchen of my new fledgling design studio, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hands covered in grout. He was the man who remembered that I loved the specific, slightly burnt taste of chestnuts roasted over an open fire, and who had a vendor secretly ship them from a tiny village in France because they were out of season here. Our wedding on the cliffside was just the beginning. The real marriage happened in the unspoken moments. It was in the way he'd wake from a nightmare, his body tense, and I'd simply wrap my arms around him, my silence a balm for wounds I would never fully see but would always honor. He carried the loneliness of a lifetime of being sought for his fortune, and I carried the scars of being deemed worthless. We didn't try to erase each other's pasts. We simply learned to hold space for them. One evening, we were curled up on the vast sofa in his our penthouse, the city lights twinkling like a fallen galaxy below. I was sketching, and he was reading a report, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. It was a scene of such ordinary peace it almost brought tears to my eyes. He looked over at me, his gaze soft. "You're quiet tonight." I put my sketchbook down. I was just thinking about Leo. Alexander didn't tense or scowl. He simply laid his report aside and gave me his full attention, a gesture that was more loving than any grand declaration. "What about him?" "Not about him, not really," I clarified, searching for the right words. "I was thinking about that version of me, the one who believed him when he said I wasn't enough. I feel so far away from her now. It's like looking at a photograph of a sad stranger." He reached out, his fingers lacing through mine. "She wasn't a stranger to me," he said, his voice low and sure. "I saw her that day in the lobby, drowning in a sea of her own papers and humiliation. I saw the fierce, stubborn pride in her eyes, even as they shone with tears. I saw the strength it took for her to walk away from a love that had turned to poison. She was always enough, Mia. She just needed to find someone whose scale wasn't broken." His words settled deep in my soul, healing a fracture I hadn't even known was still there. He hadn't saved me. He had seen me, and in his reflection I had finally learned to see myself. The ghost of Leo didn't haunt us. The poetic justice of his public humiliation was a closed chapter. The true victory wasn't his defeat, but our quiet, steadfast joy. We traveled the world, not as the trillionaire CEO and his wife, but as two curious souls. We got lost in markets in Marrakesh, hiked trails in New Zealand where no one knew our names, and spent a whole week in a tiny cottage in Scotland doing nothing but reading by the fire. I built my design studio not with his money but with his unwavering belief. He was my first and most honest critic. When a client tried to bully me into a compromise I knew was wrong, it was Alexander who taught me how to hold my ground, not with aggression, but with an unshakable confidence in my own worth. "You are the artist," he would say. "They are coming to you for your vision. Never apologize for it." Years later, at the opening of my first major solo exhibition, I stood before a crowd of art critics and socialites, my heart pounding. My eyes scanned the room and found his. He stood in the back, away from the spotlight, his arms crossed, a look of such profound, unadulterated pride on his face that my nerves instantly settled. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was all I needed. Later that night, as we celebrated with a bottle of champagne, just the two of us on our terrace, he lifted his glass. "To Mia," he said, his stormy eyes clear and full of light. "Not the girl who was left in the rain, but the woman who built a cathedral from the storm." I clinked my glass against his. "To Alexander," I replied. "Not the man who saved me, but the man who showed me I was never drowning. I was just learning how to swim." We had built a love that was not a glittering cage, but a wide-open sky. A love that was not about fixing each other, but about celebrating the perfectly imperfect whole of who we were, scars and all. The pain of the past had not vanished, but it had been transformed, alchemized into the foundation of something unshakable. The poor jerk had been the catalyst, the painful but necessary fracture that allowed the light to finally pour in. And in that light, we had both found our way home. The light we found wasn't a single, blinding sun, but a constellation of a million small, bright moments. Our life became a tapestry woven with threads of the ordinary and the extraordinary, and the beauty was that we could no longer tell the difference. Take, for instance, the great sock war of a Tuesday evening. I was folding laundry, a mundane task that felt sacred in its normalcy, when I found myself holding a single Argo-patterned sock with no match. I sighed, a little dramatically. Alexander Thorne, trillionaire CEO, master of the global financial universe, and yet you are a menace to the concept of paired footwear. He looked up from his tablet, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. It was a smile reserved only for these private, unguarded moments. I maintain a sophisticated system of single sock rotation. It keeps the sock drawer dynamic. A system that looks an awful lot like chaos, I retorted, tossing the lone sock at him. He caught it effortlessly, his eyes glinting. Chaos, my love, is just order waiting to be deciphered. He stood, abandoning his work, and advanced on me with a playful menace. And you, with your militant pairing, are stifling their individuality. What followed was a 5-minute battle fought with balled-up socks, ending with us both breathless and laughing, collapsed on a mountain of soft, mismatched cotton. This was the man the world never saw. The man who, after a day of commanding boardrooms, could find pure joy in something as silly as a sock fight. This was the reverence he showed my spirit, not by building me a golden throne, but by ensuring I never forgot how to laugh. The world, of course, still existed. There were galas and charity events, moments where we had to don our public armor and be Alexander and Mia Thorne. But even there, our private language thrived. At a stiflingly formal dinner where a business rival droned on about market fluctuations, Alexander caught my eye from across the table. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible twitch of his eyebrow, our secret signal for "this is interminable, rescue me." I smiled sweetly at the man, then turned to Alexander. "Darling, didn't you say you needed to check on that sensitive matter? The one involving the tropical orchids?" His lips quirked. "The orchids, of course. They're terribly sensitive to the wrong atmosphere." He stood, offering a perfectly polite excuse, and we escaped to a quiet balcony. "You," he said, his shoulder brushing mine as we looked out at the city, "are my favorite conspirator." "And you," I replied, leaning into him, "have a terrible poker face. I saw you counting the ceiling tiles." Our love was a living, breathing thing, and like any living thing, it needed to be nurtured. We learned each other's silent languages. I learned that when he stood perfectly still at the window late at night, he was wrestling with the ghost of the lonely boy he once was, and the best thing I could do was simply stand beside him, my presence a quiet anchor. He learned that when I grew too quiet, retreating into my sketchbook for hours, it was because the old ghost of not enough was whispering in my ear, and his best remedy was to bring me a cup of tea and tell me a ridiculous story about something that had happened at the office. We built a home, not just a residence. The penthouse slowly filled with my influence. A vibrant, slightly chaotic painting I'd done hung beside a priceless masterpiece. A lumpy, handmade ceramic mug he used for his coffee every morning sat in the cabinet next to bone china. He didn't just tolerate my presence in his world. He integrated me into its very foundation, and in doing so made it ours. One afternoon, we were walking through an art museum, and we stopped in front of a sculpture of two figures intertwined, carved from a single block of marble. The placard described it as two becoming one. Alexander studied it for a long moment, then shook his head. "No," he said softly, "that's not it at all." I looked at him, curious. "We aren't two becoming one," he said, his gaze shifting from the sculpture to me. "That would mean we had to lose parts of ourselves. We are two complete pillars standing strong on our own, choosing to hold up the same sky." Tears pricked my eyes, not from sadness but from the sheer, overwhelming truth of it. He was right. Leo had tried to whittle me down to fit his life. Alexander gave me the solid ground to build my own, right beside his. The past was no longer a wound, it was a reference point, a reminder of how far we had both come. The pain had been the chisel, and the love was the art that emerged. We had not found a perfect storybook ending because our story wasn't over. We had found something better, a beautiful, imperfect, and endlessly fascinating beginning, with a new page turning every single day. And on every page, in 1,000 different ways, we chose each other. The choice to love each other was not a single, monumental decision made at the altar, but a quiet, continuous renewal, a river that carved its path deeper with every passing day. It was in the way he began to stock my favorite pomegranate tea in every one of his global offices, a small, tangible piece of home waiting for me wherever our travels took us. It was in the way I learned the specific rhythm of his breathing when he was falling asleep, and how my own would sync with it, a lullaby of shared existence. Our life was not a shield against the world's troubles, but a fortified sanctuary within it. When a market crash sent shockwaves through his empire, I saw the weight settle on his shoulders, a familiar, stoic tension returning to his jaw. The world saw a titan, unyielding, but I saw the man who, late one night in his study, rested his forehead against my shoulder, his voice a ragged whisper. What if I can't protect them all? What if I fail? I didn't offer empty platitudes. I simply held him, my fingers tracing the tight cords of his neck. Then we'll fail together, I murmured into his hair. And then we'll get back up, together. My belief in him was not in his infallibility, but in his resilience. And that, I learned, was the greatest gift I could give, not blind faith in his success, but unwavering faith in him, regardless of the outcome. And he, in turn, was my anchor in the whirlwind of my own success. When a prominent design magazine published a scathing review of my work, calling it derivative and reliant on its patron's fame, the old ghost of inadequacy rose with a vengeance. I wanted to hide, to retreat from the studio I had built with my own hands. Alexander found me staring blankly at a half-finished canvas. He didn't tell me the critic was wrong. Instead, he picked up the magazine, read the review aloud with a completely neutral tone, and then tossed it into the recycling bin. "Well," he said, brushing his hands together, "that's one person's opinion. Now show me what you see in this piece. Tell me the story you're trying to tell." He reframed the entire experience. He didn't ask me to ignore the pain. He asked me to transcend it by reconnecting with my own purpose. He reminded me that my worth was not external, not found in the praise or condemnation of others, but in the truth of my own creation. We became students of each other. He, the master of global systems and cold, hard data, learned from me the language of color and emotion, the unquantifiable value of a feeling evoked by a certain shade of blue. I, the artist who lived in the abstract, learned from him the elegant architecture of a well-structured business plan, the quiet power of a strategically placed comma in a contract. We didn't just coexist. We made each other more complete, more formidable. One autumn, we returned to the cliffside where we were married. The wind whipped our hair and the sea roared below just as it had on that day. But we were different now. The fierce, new love had matured into something deeper, more weathered and strong, like the ancient cliffs themselves. He took my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles. "It's even more beautiful now," he said, his voice carried away by the wind. "Because we know what it's built on," I replied, leaning my head against his shoulder. "We know it can withstand the storms." He turned to me, his stormy eyes clear and full of a peace I had helped him find. "Every day with you," he said, "is a new discovery. I thought I had built everything I could ever want. But you, Mia, you showed me I hadn't even broken ground on the things that truly matter." The story of the poor jerk and the trillionaire CEO was a closed book, a prologue to our real story. Our story wasn't about a rescue or a revenge fantasy fulfilled. It was a story of two people who had been navigating the world alone, believing their particular brokenness was a life sentence. We found in each other not a fix, but a mirror that reflected not our fractures, but our strength. We had learned that the most profound love isn't about finding a perfect person, but about learning to see an imperfect person perfectly, and in that clear, unwavering vision, helping them become the very best version of themselves. And in that endless, mutual becoming, We had found a forever that felt not like an eternity, but like a series of infinitely beautiful, cherished nows. The choice to love each other was not a single, monumental decision made at the altar, but a quiet, continuous renewal, a river that carved its path deeper with every passing day. It was in the way he began to stock my favorite pomegranate tea in every one of his global offices, a small, tangible piece of home waiting for me wherever our travels took us. It was in the way I learned the specific rhythm of his breathing when he was falling asleep, and how my own would sync with it, a lullaby of shared existence. Our life was not a shield against the world's troubles, but a fortified sanctuary within it. The first true test of that sanctuary came not from a jealous ex or a corporate rival, but from within. It was a Thursday, I remember, the sky outside our panoramic windows a flat, iron gray. Alexander had been in back-to-back international calls for 12 hours, negotiating a merger that would either solidify his company's dominance or trigger a catastrophic chain reaction in the market. I'd been in my studio all day, working on a commission piece for a new library, trying to capture the essence of community in a sprawling mural. When I came back to the penthouse, the silence was different. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of concentration, but a heavy, pressurized stillness. He was standing at the window, his back to me, his shoulders so rigid they looked carved from stone. The city lights below twinkled, indifferent to the weight one man was carrying. "Alexander," I said softly. He didn't turn. "They're going to announce massive layoffs at Sterling Tech tomorrow," he said, his voice hollow, stripped of its usual resonance. 5,000 people, good people, families. It's the only way to make the numbers work for the shareholders. I came to stand beside him, not touching him yet, just sharing the space. "Is it?" "It's the only way the board will approve it, the only way the market will react positively." He finally turned his head, and the look in his eyes chilled me. It was a profound, weary isolation. What if I can't protect them all? What if this machine I built, ultimately just chews people up and spits them out? What if I'm not a builder, but just a destroyer in a better suit? This was the ghost that haunted him, the one no amount of wealth could exorcise. The fear that his legacy would be one of cold, calculated efficiency, not of human value. The world saw a titan, unyielding. I saw the boy who had lost everything, terrified of becoming the source of that same loss for others. I didn't offer empty platitudes. I didn't tell him it would be okay. I simply stepped forward and wrapped my arms around his waist, pressing my cheek against the tense muscles of his back. I felt him flinch, then shudder, then finally, his entire frame seemed to sag, his hands coming up to cover mine. "Then we'll carry it together," I murmured into his suit jacket. "The weight of it, the decision, the consequence, we'll carry it together, and then whatever happens we'll get back up, together." My belief in him was not in his infallibility, but in his humanity. And that, I learned, was the greatest gift I could give, not blind faith in his success, but unwavering faith in him, the man, regardless of the outcome. We stood like that for a long time, until the gray sky turned to black, the city lights burning brighter in the darkness. He didn't find a magical solution that night, but he found he didn't have to bear the burden alone. The next day he went back into the fray, but the hollow look was gone, replaced by a grim determination. He ended up negotiating a brutal but slightly more humane transition package, saving 1,000 jobs. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was a human one, and he had let me see the cost. He, in turn, was my anchor in the whirlwind of my own burgeoning success. A few months later, a prominent, notoriously cruel design magazine published a scathing review of my library mural. They called it cloying, hopelessly derivative, and the predictable output of a patronized artist, reliant entirely on her husband's fame rather than any innate talent. The words were like shrapnel, each one finding its mark in the most vulnerable parts of my psyche. The old ghost of not enough rose with a vengeance, its voice deafening. I felt exposed, a fraud. I locked the door to my studio and didn't leave for 2 days, staring at the walls I had painted with so much hope, now seeing only the flaws the critic had named. Alexander didn't try to break the door down. He slid a tray of food under it. He left a new, beautiful leather-bound sketchbook and a set of my favorite charcoals outside. On the third day, he simply said through the door, "I'm here when you're ready." When I finally emerged, pale and shaky, he was waiting in the living room. He didn't engulf me in a hug or offer sympathy. He just looked at me, his gaze steady. Then he picked up the magazine from the coffee table, opened it to the review, and read it aloud in a completely neutral, almost clinical tone. He gave each vicious word its due, no more, no less. When he finished, he closed the magazine with a definitive snap and tossed it into the recycling bin. "Well," he said, brushing his hands together as if physically dusting off the venom, "that's one person's opinion, a person who, I might add, has never created anything more profound than a clever turn of phrase designed to hurt." He walked over to me and took my hands. "Now come, show me what you see in this mural. Tell me the story you were trying to tell the community. Remind me." He reframed the entire experience. He didn't ask me to ignore the pain. He asked me to transcend it by reconnecting with my own purpose, my own voice. He reminded me that my worth was not external, not found in the praise or condemnation of others, but in the truth of my own creation. He took me back to the studio, and under his quiet, patient gaze, I started talking. I pointed out the hidden children's faces in the swirling colors, the couple holding hands I'd modeled after two elderly volunteers I'd met, the way the light in the painting fell from the central heart of the library. I talked for an hour and he listened, and with every word the critic's voice faded and my own grew stronger. We became students of each other, dedicated and fascinated. He, the master of global systems and cold, hard data, learned from me the language of color and emotion, the unquantifiable value of a feeling evoked by a certain shade of blue in a corporate lobby, the impact of natural light on employee morale. I, the artist who lived in the abstract and the emotional, learned from him the elegant architecture of a well-structured business plan, the quiet power of a strategically placed comma in a contract, the confidence that came from understanding the ecosystem in which my studio had to survive. We didn't just coexist. We made each other more complete, more formidable, expanding each other's worlds. Our shared life developed its own rituals, its own sacred geography. There was the tiny, family-owned Italian restaurant tucked away in a forgotten alley, where the owner, Mama Gianna, called Alexander ragazzo mio and scolded him if he didn't finish his pasta. There, he was just a man, not a CEO. There were the Sunday morning walks through the botanical gardens, where we'd make up elaborate, silly stories about the other people we saw. There was the Wall of Wonders in our home, a floor-to-ceiling magnetic board where we pinned everything from a receipt from our first proper date, to a feather from a bird that had crashed into our window and survived, to a particularly bad first draft of a poem he tried to write for me. It was a map of our joy, a physical testament to a life being lived fully. One crisp autumn, we returned to the cliffside where we had been married. The wind whipped our hair and the sea roared below just as it had on that day. But we were different now. The fierce, new love had matured into something deeper, more weathered and strong, like the ancient cliffs themselves. The initial, almost desperate intensity had softened into a profound, steady certainty. He took my hand, his thumb, calloused from years of holding pens and shaking hands, stroking my knuckles. "It's even more beautiful now," he said, his voice carried away by the wind but his meaning clear in his eyes. The story of the poor jerk and the trillionaire CEO was a closed book, a prologue to our real story. Our story wasn't about a rescue or a revenge fantasy fulfilled. It was a story of two people who had been navigating the world alone, believing their particular brokenness was a life sentence. We found in each other not a fix, but a mirror that reflected not our fractures, but our strength. We had learned that the most profound love isn't about finding a perfect person, but about learning to see an imperfect person perfectly, and in that clear, unwavering vision, helping them become the very best version of themselves. And in that endless, mutual becoming, we had found a forever that felt not like an eternity but like a series of infinitely beautiful, cherished nows. It was in the shared glance across a crowded room, the unspoken joke in a tense meeting, the warmth of his hand finding mine in the dark. It was a love that had been tested, not by external villains, but by the internal demons of fear and inadequacy, and had emerged not just intact but fortified. We were two complete pillars, standing strong on our own, choosing every day to hold up the same magnificent sky. And the view from there was more breathtaking than anything either of us could have ever imagined alone. The seasons turned, each one layering new memories upon the foundation of our life. Winter came, and with it, our first Christmas together in the penthouse. Alexander, who had previously treated holidays as logistical problems to be solved by a team of assistants, threw himself into the experience with the fervor of a convert. I came home one evening to find the entire great room filled with the scent of pine and the chaotic, beautiful mess of decorating. A magnificent tree stood naked in the corner, boxes of ornaments scattered around it like treasure chests. "I told the staff I would handle it," he said, looking slightly overwhelmed but determined, holding a tangled string of lights as if it were a complex algorithm. "I've never actually done this before." My heart swelled. This man who could command armies of employees with a single email was being bested by a string of fairy lights. "Here," I said, laughing, taking one end. "It's a two-person job. You have to find the end and then we walk towards each other." For hours we decorated. He listened, rapt, as I told him the story behind each of my cheap, sentimental ornaments: the chipped ceramic star I made in third grade, the glass ball from my first Christmas living on my own, the silly reindeer with one antler missing that Leo had always hated. Alexander handled each one as if it were a priceless artifact, finding each a place of honor on the tree. Then he produced a small, velvet box of his own. Inside were two simple, exquisite crystal ornaments. One was engraved with the coordinates of the cliff where we were married. The other was engraved with the date of our wedding and a single word, always asterisk. "Our first ones," he said, his voice soft. "The start of our own collection." That night, with only the tree lights illuminating the room, we sat on the floor drinking hot chocolate, and it felt more sacred than any gala, any board meeting, any grand gesture. He was building a history with me, brick by brick, memory by memory. He was learning the language of tradition, of softness, of home. Spring arrived, and with it, a new challenge, one that took us both by surprise. My design studio, which had started as a single room with a drafting table, was thriving. I'd earned a reputation not as Alexander Thorne's wife, but as Mia Thorne, the artist who brings soul to corporate spaces. It led to my biggest commission yet, redesigning the flagship store for a legendary, century-old jewelry brand, Devuro. It was a career-making opportunity, but it came with immense pressure and a notoriously difficult, old-world patriarch, Monsieur Laurent Devuro. The first meeting was a disaster. Monsieur Devuro, a man in his 80s with eyes like flint and hands that had held more jewels than a museum, dismissed my initial concepts with a wave of his liver-spotted hand. "Too modern, too emotional. Devuro is about legacy, tradition, cold, hard brilliance." He looked at Alexander, who had come with me for moral support. "You, Monsieur Thorne, you understand. Value, permanence." I felt myself shrinking, the old insecurities whispering that I was just a girl playing dress-up in a world of real adults. But then I felt Alexander's leg press gently against mine under the table. A silent signal. "I'm here. Stand your ground." I took a breath. "With all due respect, Monsieur Devuro," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "tradition without emotion is just a museum piece. What is a jewel if not a vessel for emotion? A promise, a memory, a celebration. That is the legacy I want to capture. Not the coldness of the stone, but the warmth of the hand that wears it." The room went silent. Monsieur Devuro stared at me, his expression unreadable. Alexander said nothing, but I could feel his pride radiating from him. He had not spoken for me. He had simply been my anchor, allowing me to find my own voice. I worked for weeks on the revised concept, often late into the night. Alexander would bring me coffee, sometimes just sitting in the corner of my studio reading, a quiet, supportive presence. He became my sounding board, his sharp, analytical mind helping me structure my wilder, more abstract ideas into a coherent, persuasive presentation. The data supports your intuition, he'd say, looking over my sketches. Experiences that engage the emotions have a 70% higher recall rate. You're not just designing a store, you're designing a feeling. Now prove it to him. The day of the final presentation arrived. I was a bundle of nerves. As we walked into the Devuro headquarters, Alexander stopped me just outside the boardroom door. "Look at me, Mia," he said. He framed my face with his hands, his touch grounding me. "Remember who you are. You are the woman who rebuilt her life from the ashes. You are the artist who sees the world in colors the rest of us are blind to. You are fierce and you are brilliant. Now go in there and show him." His belief was a suit of armor. I walked into that room and I presented my heart. I spoke of love stories and heirlooms, of light and shadow, of creating a space that felt not like a vault but like a sanctuary for dreams. When I finished, Monsieur Devereux was quiet for a long, long time. Then he slowly stood, walked over to me and took my hand. "Mademoiselle Thorne," he said, his voice gruff, "you have made an old man remember why he fell in love with jewels in the first place. The commission is yours." It was a victory that was entirely my own, yet it was one I knew I could never have achieved without the unshakable foundation of Alexander's love. He didn't build my career for me. He gave me the courage and the confidence to build it myself. Summer blazed and we escaped the city for a month, renting a villa on the Amalfi Coast. It was there, away from the pressures of our respective worlds, that we truly learned the art of doing nothing together. We spent lazy mornings in bed, reading aloud to each other. We swam in the turquoise sea, his strong, sure strokes a contrast to my playful splashing. We ate sun-warmed tomatoes and fresh mozzarella on our terrace, talking for hours about everything and nothing. One afternoon, we were exploring a hidden cove, accessible only by a treacherous path down the cliffs. I slipped on some loose gravel, my ankle twisting painfully beneath me. A sharp cry escaped my lips. In an instant, Alexander was there, his arm around my waist, taking my full weight. I'm okay," I insisted, though tears of pain and frustration welled in my eyes. "Hush," he said softly, and without another word he swept me into his arms, carrying me as if I weighed nothing. He carried me all the way back up the steep path, his breathing steady and even, not setting me down until we were safely on the level ground of the villa's garden. He tended to my ankle with a surprising gentleness, wrapping it carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You didn't have to carry me the whole way," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He looked up, his stormy eyes meeting mine. "Mia," he said, as if stating the most obvious fact in the world, "I will always carry you, in every way that matters." It was in that moment, with the scent of lemon blossoms in the air and the Mediterranean sun warming my skin, that I felt it, a shift, a deepening. The last vestiges of the woman who had been left in the rain finally, completely dissolved. I was not someone who had been saved. I was part of a partnership, a team. We carried each other. As our first anniversary approached, the world expected a spectacle. The press speculated about private islands and custom-designed jets, but we had learned that our most precious moments were the ones we crafted for ourselves, away from the public eye. On the morning of our anniversary, I woke to find Alexander already awake, propped on an elbow, just watching me. "Good morning," he whispered, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," I smiled. "1 year." "1 year," he echoed, his gaze so full of love it was almost overwhelming. "The fastest and slowest year of my life." He had planned a day that was a map of our relationship. A quiet breakfast at the tiny cafe where we'd had our first real coffee date. A walk through the botanical gardens, retracing our steps from those early, tentative Sundays. And then, he led me to a part of the city I'd never seen before. A quiet, historic neighborhood of brownstones with tiny, hidden gardens. He stopped in front of one, a beautiful, ivy-covered building with a bright blue door. "I bought it," he said simply. "Bought what?" I asked, confused. "This, the building. It used to be a small publishing house. It's been vacant for a year." He took a key from his pocket and placed it in my hand. I thought perhaps it might be the permanent home for the Mia Thorne Design Studio. No more renting. A place to put down roots. To grow. I was speechless. I unlocked the blue door and stepped inside. Sunlight streamed through massive windows, illuminating a vast, open space with original hardwood floors and exposed brick. It was perfect. It was more than a studio. It was a testament to his belief in my future. He hadn't just given me a space. He had given me a legacy. That night we had a private dinner on our terrace. He gave me a small, unwrapped box. Inside was not a jewel, but a simple, old key. "It's from my parents' first house," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "The only thing I managed to keep from the bank when everything was lost. It's the key to the front door of the only place I ever felt truly safe as a child. I've carried it with me every day since. I want you to have it, because you are my home now, Mia. You are my safety." I clutched the key, warm from his pocket, and I knew no diamond, no mansion, no private jet could ever compare to this. He had given me a piece of his past, the most vulnerable, broken piece of himself, trusting me to hold it. It was the ultimate act of reverence. We danced under the stars to music only we could hear, our bodies moving in a rhythm that was uniquely ours. The city hummed below us, a symphony of lives being lived, but up there, on our terrace in our sanctuary, there was only us. "You know," I said, my head resting on his shoulder, "I don't think about him anymore. Leo. It's like he was a character in a book I read a long time ago, a sad, small character." Alexander's arms tightened around me. "I am grateful to him," he said, to my surprise. "Grateful?" "Yes, because he was foolish enough to let you go, and because he hurt you just enough that when I found you, you were able to recognize a love that was real. You were able to see the difference." It was a profound forgiveness, a grace that encompassed the entire painful journey. The past was not an enemy. It was the winding, difficult path that had led us to this exact moment, to this perfect, shared understanding. We stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other, the two pillars holding up the sky. The story wasn't about how I turned around and married a trillionaire. It was about how, after being broken, I had the courage to turn around and walk towards a future I deserved. It was about how a man who had everything discovered that the only thing of true value was the love he had almost been too afraid to let in. Our love was a living, breathing entity, built on a foundation of mutual respect, fierce protection, and a tenderness that still took my breath away. It was messy and real and stronger than anything I could have imagined. And the best part was, it was only the beginning. The next chapter was waiting to be written, and we would write it together. "Because we know what it's built on," I replied, leaning my head against his shoulder, the wool of his coat scratchy against my cheek. "We know it can withstand the storms. We've weathered a few." He turned to me then, his stormy eyes clear and full of a peace I knew I had helped him find. "Every day with you," he said, "is a new discovery. I thought I had built everything I could ever want. I had the company, the wealth, the influence. But you, Mia, you showed me I hadn't even broken ground on the things that truly matter. You taught me the architecture of a happy silence, the value of a mismatched sock, the courage it takes to be truly seen." He cupped my face, his touch infinitely gentle. "You didn't just walk into my life. You rewrote it. You gave it color." The story of the poor jerk and the trillionaire CEO was a closed book, a prologue to our real story. Our story wasn't about a rescue or a revenge fantasy fulfilled. It was a story of two people who had been navigating the world alone, believing their particular brokenness was a life sentence. We found in each other not a fix, but a mirror that reflected not our fractures, but our strength. We had learned that the most profound love isn't about finding a perfect person, but about learning to see an imperfect person perfectly, and in that clear, unwavering vision, helping them become the very best version of themselves. And in that endless, mutual becoming, we had found a forever that felt not like an eternity, but like a series of infinitely beautiful, cherished nows. It was in the shared glance across a crowded room, the unspoken joke in a tense meeting, the warmth of his hand finding mine in the dark. It was a love that had been tested, not by external villains, but by the internal demons of fear and inadequacy, and had emerged not just intact but fortified. We were two complete pillars, standing strong on our own, choosing every day to hold up the same magnificent sky. And the view from there was more breathtaking than anything either of us could have ever imagined alone. And that's my story, from heartbreak in the rain to a love I never dared to dream of. But now I truly want to hear from you. As you listened, walking with me through every painful and beautiful moment, what would you have done in my place? When Leo walked away, would you have begged for a second chance? When Alexander offered a love that was as terrifying as it was wonderful, would you have had the courage to say yes? If you could choose, would you take back the painful past if it meant never meeting your future? Or would you bravely walk into the unknown, hopping, praying for a better tomorrow? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Your stories matter to me too. Thank you from the very bottom of my healed heart for listening right till the very end. You shared my heartbreak and my joy, and that is a gift I will always cherish. If this story reminded you that real, courageous, transformative love still exists, then please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of hearts finding their way home against all odds. Remember, no matter what you're going through, you are not alone in your struggles. Welcome home.